Marvel's Spider-Man releasing back in 2018 was one of the biggest moments of my young life. As I mentioned before, if you were there and you saw just how much hype and build-up there was to that game, you could say it was damn near the video game equivalent to Avengers Infinity War. Along with God of War, Uncharted 4, and The Last of Us Part 2, this game kind of completes the PlayStation 4 Mount Rushmore. These games define the entire generation, and that's not by accident. Ever since it was announced in 2016, thousands of YouTube videos are put together chronicling every little step of its development and press until it released. Then, thousands of creators, myself included, posted videos playing the game. It was such a unifying experience, and by the time it was over, we could only wonder, what's next? Well, a spin-off PS5 launch title tech demo game about Miles finding his identity as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man would actually be next. But after that, we got confirmation in a PS5 showcase in summer of 2021 that Spider-Man 2, starring Kraven the Hunter and Venom as its central antagonist, allowing you to play as both Peter Parker and Miles Morales, was on its way. And with that, the cycle began anew. TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, just about any platform you could think of was bursting at the seams with excitement and chopping at the bit for any new piece of information regarding the game. Then, in early 2023, they showed gameplay. Backsuit gameplay, dynamic switching, slingshot, and web wing mechanics were all shown off, as well as a render speed that could only be achievable with next-gen hardware. Needless to say, the PlayStation community was restless as we waited for October 20th, 2023. When the release date was confirmed, I immediately arranged to have that weekend off from work. I even broke my main rule and I actually pre-ordered this game. I went to GameStop at 10 PM the night of the 19th and sped home, blaring the symbiote theme from Spider-Man 3 in my car, installed the game, and played it practically non-stop for the next 2.5 days, securing the Platinum Trophy by that Saturday night. When I returned to work, I was quick to tell anyone who would listen that it was the greatest game that I had ever played and that it gave me everything that I could possibly wanted. And in a way, that was true. But when I went back in to play the game again and the honeymoon phase was over, I began to realize little by little that this game was just slightly imperfect. I began to realize that this wasn't the greatest game I had ever played. It might not even be better than the first game. Actually, it might be significantly worse. Now, I've played through this game start to finish no less than 5 times, and with each playthrough, the glaring issues therein only become more and more obvious. Now, I did a sustaining mediocrity video on the first game, but that was more from the perspective of someone who loved that game and just thought it fell a little short in some places. However, that was the first attempt at a Spider-Man game on that scale, though it's more forgivable, as you can reasonably assume that these issues would be cleared up in the future. Some of them were. I complained that, special enemy types would disappear when you defeated a certain amount of them, and that was kind of disappointing. This was fixed. I also complained that the 2 central antagonists of that first game had nearly identical motivations, and it felt somewhat uninspired. This too was fixed. However, for this being the 3rd game in the franchise, the list of issues that weren't resolved or were somehow made even worse is shockingly long. Now, this video isn't to needlessly bash Spider-Man 2. The discourse around this game tends to default to one of 2 extremes. It's either the greatest game ever created and a flawless masterpiece in every sense of the word, or it's a blasphemous, disastrous piece of shovelware that Sony sends out to die and makes a mockery of the Spider-Man brand. Neither of these things are true, obviously. The truth is that Spider-Man 2 is a really good game that should have been great. I would like to focus on that last part. For all the good that this game does, it's like every little thing comes with a caveat. You can play as both Spider-Men, but one is blatantly more fun to play as, yet the campaign will force you to spend a disproportionately large amount of time as the other one. Bosses have health bars. You actually know when the fight is about to end, and it doesn't just catch you by surprise. But there are fewer than there were in the last game. And this game is longer, somehow, with fewer boss fights, and a lot of them are kind of lame. The map is bigger, but you hardly ever have a reason to explore the other boroughs, unless the plot demands it. It goes on and on like that, trust me. I'm not here to give the game a verbal lashing or anything. Plenty of people have already done that. I just want to give my honest retrospective thoughts on what we got versus what we all wanted. Just like I did last time, I'm going to divide this video into 2 major aspects. I will discuss the story and the gameplay, going over each one twice. I will highlight what I liked first, and then go back to discuss what I didn't like. And just like last time, there will be a secret final category at the end. Let's begin with the story. starting with a little recap of how it goes down. 2 years after the Devil's Breath incident in the first game, Peter finds himself struggling to make enough money to keep May's house. His relationship with MJ is going well, and she's on her way to becoming a well-respected journalist at the Daily Bugle. Miles is about to graduate high school and is having a hard time defining his identity, but just about everything else seems to be going well for him. Their lives are interrupted when Sandman appears, going on a rampage, clearly mentally rattled by something as it's impossible to reason with him. After containing him, he says something ominous about them being hunted, which takes form as a band of mystery hunters appear and spring Martin Lee, the secondary antagonist of the previous game, from prison during a convoy. This makes things complicated for Miles as he knows that the man who killed his father is out there somewhere, and he has to decide what he'll do when the time comes. From there, Peter's old friend Harry, who we found out in the last game was struggling with a hereditary life-threatening illness, returns, looking healthier than ever. He offers Peter a job at a research foundation that he started in honor of their lost loved ones. After these same hunters appear, looking for Tombstone, who now works at Coney Island, Harry reveals that the treatment that stopped his illness seems to have given him some strange extra new abilities. It's an adaptive exoskeleton of some kind, which we all know is a symbiote, as they kinda gave that away at the end of the last game. Craven the Hunter then makes his presence known, as well as the fact that he's been hunting Peter's previous enemies and killing them, when he goes after Dr. Connors, who's been in charge of monitoring Harry's condition. After turning Connors into the lizard once more, Craven mortally wounds Peter, and Harry's suit latches onto him, saving him and boosting his physical attributes. After some time, the suit begins to alter Peter's personality, and after curing the lizard, he learns that it's an alien. Craven tries to capture him, but he ends up escaping, at the expense of Miles being captured himself. Peter shows up at Craven's manor to save Miles and fights Craven nearly to the death, at which point Miles has to stop him, and Peter does manage to pry the symbiote off his body. As all this has been happening, Harry's physical and mental condition has been on a steady decline since he lost the suit, and his desperation has only grown. Dr. Connors and Peter agree that the suit needs to be destroyed, but Harry takes umbrage to that idea, practically stealing it back and becoming Venom, shortly before brutally killing Craven. From there, the city is practically instantly overrun by symbiotes, and Miles, working with Lee, goes into Peter's mind, and together they awaken dormant symbiote cells in his body, giving him a new suit that has the ability to purge existing symbiotes by touch. And then, Venom is defeated, symbiote army is destroyed, and Harry is left comatose. After the dust settles, Peter and MJ agree that he's earned the right to take a little break from being Spider-Man, and he leaves the city in the hands of Miles. Roll credits. That's a lot compared to the first game. It's almost double the storylines crammed into maybe just slightly more runtime, maybe the exact same. That would be incredibly difficult for any team of writers to successfully accomplish, much less this team of writers. Now, that's not to say that these guys have no talent, just that they have a habit of speedrunning their plots, and this game is no different. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Seeing how long the script is already, I'll be blown away if this video comes in under 45 minutes. So let's get started with the parts of the story that I do like. First, I still really like this version of Peter Parker. I think that Intihar & Co. have really nailed his personality, allowing him to be irreverent, hilarious, awkward, vulnerable, and strong when he needs to be. Yuri Lowenthal's performance is as dynamic as ever, and it's criminal that he wasn't nominated at 2023's Game Awards. There's a lot to be said about Peter's new face, as they did change face models from John Bubniak to Ben Jordan, deciding that Ben's face matches Yuri's performance capture better. I don't care about that, and I don't really care about the reason behind it either. The only thing that matters to me is that Yuri continues to play the character moving forward, because he is rapidly becoming the most iconic actor to do so. I really appreciate the writing team taking time to allow Peter to feel real emotions and process everything that he's been through in a way that feels organic. Was it enough time? Maybe not, but we'll get there. I also really appreciate his friendship with Harry in this game. The entire game desperately relies on it, so it had better well be executed flawlessly. He only existed in the form of audio recordings in the first game, so there was a lot of work to be done and not a lot of time to do it. Luckily, the performances of both of our Ben 10 actors, Yuri and Graham, do the majority of the legwork here, and I find it to be effective. In fact, all of Peter's interpersonal relationships are bright spots in comparison to the first game. I don't find MJ to be nearly as irritating as before, even if I don't love the Lois Landification of her character, but his dynamic with Miles, both as a friend and mentor to him, I think is very well executed. At least, when it's actually being given focus. Let's see. What else do I like about the story of this game? Oh no. Oh no. Guys, I think that's it. I think we have to move on to gameplay now. Back in November of 2020, when the game focused on Miles Morales hit store shelves, many of us wondered how the next title could possibly make us want to play as Peter when Miles has more powers and a much more expressive swinging style. I'm pleased to say that while I did much prefer exploring the open world as Miles, there's plenty that makes Peter still fun to play as well. The caveat to that is that it's the black suit. And that is its own can of worms that we'll get to later on, but it seems that Insomniac knew that they would have to give Peter something serious in order to keep him level with Miles. When you don't have the black suit, Peter has these Dr. Octopus-style arms on his back, which are admittedly cool to use in combat, but it's still not something I'm a huge fan of. When you double your Spider-Man, you tend to double your fun. By the same token, they also decided to give Miles a few new abilities that he didn't have in the previous game, and it makes him a blast to play as, especially towards the end of the game when you're facing larger crowds of enemies. Beyond that, this game gave us a couple of new traversal mechanics in the form of the slingshot and the web wings. I was concerned initially that the addition of a gliding mechanic would discourage swinging, but the game is capable of moving at such high speeds and the web wings themselves are tuned to such a degree that you're incentivized to use them in tandem with swinging in order to get from one part of New York to the other as efficiently as possible. Combining that with your aerial abilities to increase speed and or height, with the option to recharge them by doing tricks, it comes together like magic. All of these systems work together in a perfect synergy to give you, as a player, the most fun open world traversal system I've ever experienced. Possibly in my whole life as a gamer. Sometimes, even now, all this time later, I'll just boot the game up and swing around for 30 minutes to an hour, maybe even longer, because I do find it to be so enjoyable. We should also talk about combat. As I mentioned before, this game gives you abilities that you trigger by pressing L1 and one of the 4 face buttons together. There are 2 trees for each Spider-Man, with Peter having access to both the symbiote abilities and these new Doc Ock arms. Miles has all of his Venom powers from the previous game, but also has new electric-type powers that begin to unlock one by one after he encounters Lee for the first time since becoming Spider-Man. I really like this for 2 main reasons. Firstly, in the last game, the one where he plays Miles, you would have to choose between healing and combat and using your Venom abilities, as they are both tied to the focus meter. Now they operate independently, and it makes combat scenarios a little bit less stressful. The other reason is that, much like the new abilities, the gadgets are tied to the same system. You press R1 and a face button to use one of the new gadgets, which streamlines the experience in comparison to the previous games wherein you would have to pretty much bring up a weapons wheel in the middle of a fight. Now, you don't have to do that anymore, and it doesn't interrupt the flow of combat. I really do appreciate this change. On top of that, there are new combat skills you can unlock over the course of the game that give you so many more options for self-expression in comparison to the previous titles. It's just good, clean fun. Now, I believe that's enough positivity. Let's jump into what I don't like, starting with Peter, particularly in relation to the black suit. First, let's address the elephant in the room. Peter is nerfed. Not in the same way that most people online have been saying for the last year. He's not intentionally made weaker for the purpose of putting Miles on a pedestal in his place. Sure, he's nearly getting killed by Sandman and getting one-tapped by Kraven, and he seems generally helpless in situations where he would have found success previously. But it's not to embarrass or emasculate him. It's much, much more stupid than that. It's done to highlight Peter's inadequacies so that when he does get the symbiote and it makes him better, it's easier to see how much more competent he is with it. I don't like that. Not one bit. You don't have to make him useless without it in order to make it clear how good he is with it. It's like, look, he almost suffocated to death fighting Sandman, but with the black suit, he's able to single-handedly body this new mutated version of the Lizard. See how cool he is now with this new suit that gives him these extra powers? Isn't that nice? Well, no, it's not nice, it's cheap. And it's not the only example of going lazy on the black suit arc. Another thing that happens is that once the suit starts doing what the suit does, Peter starts talking about not being a good enough Spider-Man without it, and acting like he's jealous of Miles. That doesn't come up at all beforehand, so it seems just so out of nowhere. He never verbalizes feeling inadequate or wishing he was better, so why is he doing it now? Even the third Raimi movie, for all its faults, knew to establish Peter's thirst for revenge before he gets the symbiote. It's supposed to enhance negative emotions, not create them. Just like when MJ gets a symbiote and immediately starts talking to Peter about how selfish he is and how he's failing as a man because he's too committed to the city. Like, where is this suddenly coming from? You couldn't lay the groundwork for this even a little bit before we got here? Not to mention the fact that Peter only has the black suit on for 3 days before he damn near becomes Venom. Seriously, he gets it, fights Kraven's guys, and then the very next day he crashes the party and meets Kraven for the second time, stealing the lizard serum so that they can cure him. Then the next day, Peter fights Connors and cures him, so that he can learn that the suit is an alien. Then he goes home and takes a nap, and Kraven's guys show up, and then Miles gets captured, and then the very next day, Peter fights Kraven, and then Miles helps him get the suit off. Why are we speedrunning? In the third Raimi movie, Peter has a suit for like a couple of weeks. Then Harry gets the symbiote back and immediately turns into this giant hulking monster who takes over the entirety of New York within a day or two. It's enough to give you whiplash. But now that I'm talking about Venom, let's spend some time here. Harry reveals that he has a strange sentient suit when Kraven's guys attack Coney Island to capture Tombstone. Then, I think 24 to 48 hours later, he pops up at the Steel Foundry as Agent Venom? Like, how the hell did this happen so fast? Then, when the suit goes over to Peter, it's pretty clear that the thing is outright evil. It's talking to him, telling him to kill Kraven. It wants to take over the world, and it wants to use Peter's body to do so. But why did it do nothing of the sort when Harry had it for years? Then Peter wears it for 3 days and gives it enough negative karma for Harry to just instantly become Venom when he gets it back? Now look, I know Harry was harboring resentment for Peter because it seemed like he wouldn't give back the suit, and then he overheard Norman showing some love to the guy. So yeah, he's got some complicated feelings for his best friend right now, but is that really enough? Not for me. And Venom himself is so beyond disappointing. I'm not a huge fan of him as a Spider-Man villain specifically, but I like him enough as a Marvel character. But he's not really a character here, he's just a big monster alien that wants to take over the world. You would think that with them using Harry Osborn instead of Eddie Brock that we'd be in store for something unique and new, but it's really just the symbiote trying to seduce Peter back because it really doesn't want to kill him. It wants to use him. This is different from Eddie how exactly, other than not being nearly as interesting? Better yet, let's half-ass an adaptation of the Donny Cates King in Black run from, let me check my notes here, 2020 to 2021? Wait, but that's a whole 2 years after they first teased Venom at the end of the last game. What was their plan before that? Not to mention the half-assed attempt at recapturing Spider-Man Web of Shadows. Do you know why the symbiote invasion works so well in that game and is still so memorable? Because it's the entire point. We were so steeped in that Venom craze of the late 2000s, and so the game was built around that. It wasn't just something thrown in for the last hour and a half of the game. But that's enough about Venom for now. There's another core villain in this game, and that is Kraven the Hunter. Now, I am a massive Kraven the Hunter fan. So much so, in fact, that I did not go see the movie that Sony just released about him. I had planned on inserting a clip of myself reacting to the announcement that he'd be in the game, but I decided not to embarrass myself. You can look for the clip here on the channel if you want, but the point is that he ranks in my top 3 Spider-Man villains of all time, right alongside Dr. Octopus and Mysterio. I love that he's simply a man who has grown bored with hunting beasts many times his size, and is now setting his sights on the most dangerous game, Spider-Man. A man who develops an obsession so complete that it consumes his entire life, in the most literal sense. In fact, it's hard to think of a comic book character who stayed dead longer than Sergei Kravinoff, outside of, like, Uncle Ben and Thomas and Martha Wayne. That's not really what we have here, though. Here, Spider-Man isn't even on Kraven's radar until after he gets the black suit. Instead, he's been cleaning up Peter's rogues gallery in the hopes of finding a challenge worthy of his final hunt. This includes murdering Shocker, Electro, Vulture, and Scorpion. On one hand, I understand this decision as it's a tried and true method of displaying the new threat, and have them dispatch the previous enemies with ease where Peter had struggled. On the other hand, though, these are some of Spider-Man's oldest foes. Vulture is literally his first actual villain, and now he's dead. All the others that I mentioned, maybe even Rhino, all dead. That really sucks. From there, we have to talk about Kraven's motivation. This is a heavily, and I do mean heavily, diluted adaptation of Kraven's Last Hunt from 1992. In that story, Kraven devises a plan that will finally get the best of Spider-Man, and he appears to successfully kill and bury him. He then dresses as Spider-Man and takes up his role for a few weeks, but takes things too far by brutalizing and killing criminals. After this, Peter wakes up from the tranquilizing bullet that Kraven shot him with and crawls out of his grave to confront him. Kraven then makes him fight another villain called Vermin, who actually manages to defeat him but is stopped by Kraven before he can finish him off. He frees Vermin and concedes to Spider-Man that his career as a hunter is finished. Now that he's accomplished everything he ever wanted, he can die happy. So, he indeed kills himself, leaving behind a confession of what he had done. In this game's version of things, though, he's a man dying of cancer who refuses to allow himself to die in such a trivial and meaningless way. Instead, he demands a death worthy of him and hopes to hunt a beast so great that it defeats him and claims his life. So he goes to New York and starts cleaning up Spider-Man's table scraps. Now, Peter and Kraven only meet 3 times in this game, so you don't really find out about this in a very organic way, you just kind of read it. In this game, Kraven isn't an obsessed madman who so desperately needs to claim victory in this final aspect of his life so that he may know peace. Instead, he's kind of just got a death wish, and just wants to die in the most grisly way possible. He's so eager to be killed that he isn't even doing it right. He mutates the lizard into a whole new dinosaur-sized creature, and when he's fighting Spider-Man, he begs him to snap his neck. And at that point, he's barely even fighting back. It's less like he wants to be defeated, and more like he kind of just wants to throw the fight. It's boring, and it's lame, and it reduces the character to his most surface-level traits. Just like Venom. Beyond that, I could harp on Kraven barely even seeming like a hunter when he just has an army of goons with damn near Stark Tech doing all of his dirty work, but that's something else I want to talk about first. Captain Yuri Watanabe. If you played the DLC of the first game, then you knew she'd be suiting up as a character called Wraith in this game, serving as a minor antagonist turned ally to Peter. What none of us could really be prepared for, though, is just how much her absence would hurt this game. When I talked about the last one, I described Yuri as Spider-Man's own Jim Gordon, and I didn't do so lightly. She was Peter's eyes and ears on the ground. She served as the most realistic and organic way for both Spider-Man and the player to know what was going on the ground level of the city. Especially in the second half after Devil's Breath has been released and the Sinister Six popped up. She was vital not only for serving as the most direct way to see the impact of the player's actions, but also being the only regular person Spider-Man can trust. Without her, all of that is gone. I didn't really start to notice what was missing here until after the lizard fight. Yuri had already gone rogue by the time that Miles becomes Spider-Man, so in that game we are introduced to a podcast by a character named Danica Hart, played by Ashley Birch. Hi, Ashley. If by some chance you see this, I say this with nothing but love. Danica is no Yuri. Also, I'm pretty good at voices, so if you could put in a good word for me with Sony. Anyway, she's carried over to this game and serves as a mouthpiece for what we have to assume is the general thoughts and feelings of the people of New York, but it gets to a point where all she really does is just recap what you just did and go, right guys? Isn't that crazy? It's egregious during the Black Suit arc because she comments on the new suit you're wearing and just immediately makes the connection that it seems to be affecting you and making you act differently. She knows that you and Lizard both went into the sewer, but only one of you came out. Well, how do you know that the suit has anything to do with anything? To be quite honest, considering that we crashed a helicopter through Manhattan in the first game, his public appearance with or without the symbiote hasn't changed much, if at all. Only the people close to him should know something's wrong. And the thing with the Lizard, how does she know at all? Spider-Man has yet to make an appearance in public since the fight, so where is she getting this information from? When things like this take place in a story, I tend to refer to it as the character read the script. And that's all Danica Hart does in this game, is she just reads the script to the player. It's a little bit more than just disappointing. Now, let's talk about gameplay. To be honest, this is probably where I have the least to say. The main thing I don't like is that even while I was excited to see that the stealth here would be more robust this time around, letting you remain undetected the entire time, rather than, after you take out a couple enemies, everybody knows where you are. And it's similar to the Miles game in that way. It just frustrates me that the AI for enemies is still just as stupid as ever, and you barely have to think when you're engaging with it. The game still just tells you when an enemy is safe to eliminate. It takes all the fun out of a stealth game when you don't have to think or try at all. Beyond that, I do miss the gadgets. I thought it could be fun to at least still have the web bomb, the trip mine, the impact webbing, maybe even the gravity well from the Miles game, and be able to equip and hotkey which gadgets that you wanted to use in combat, but no. It kind of takes all the creativity and expression out of the gameplay, and it could have been a good way to differentiate Miles and Peter from a gameplay perspective, but no, we just can't have that. Now, very quickly, let's circle back around to the other elephant in the room, which is the anti-Venom suit. This is a gameplay and story issue. This is twice now that the game has randomly given Peter a perfectly crafted suit to take on the main bad guy, and this time it seems permanent. Oh boy. Now, from a gameplay perspective, I understand why this was done. This may be a story tackling the symbiote as a narrative device, but it's a game first. The moment-to-moment experience of playing the game is, always has been, and always will be the most important element. Now, this game also has Venom in it, which means that at a certain point, Peter has to lose the suit. However, you spent hours to this point earning skill points and unlocking skills and abilities with said black suit, so to take it away for a narrative reason, and not let you use the things that the game has kind of forced you to obtain would simply be bad game design. So, when I went to my skill tree and saw that the symbiote skills were still there, just grayed out, it didn't seem like they were completely locked away and more like temporarily unavailable, I realized where we were going with this, and I've honestly had mixed feelings about that for the last year and a half. I don't like it at all, but I do understand why it was done. I just don't know if I can confidently say that there was a better way to handle it from a gameplay perspective. With all that out of the way, it's time to address the secret final category that I mentioned earlier. Miles Morales. Holy shit. For this game to be about both Spider-Men, and for the two of them to share the box art together, and for this game's goddamn tagline to be greater together, this game sure is really only about one of them, and the other is just kind of there. Let's compare each Spider-Man's plot in this game. Peter is dealing with feelings of inadequacy after failing to save his aunt, and his life is now spiraling out of control as he can't seem to find a steady job since his last boss turned into a supervillain. His best friend comes back into the picture, whose illness is being treated by an experimental apparatus that one of his old nemeses is in charge of. Whoops, that nemesis has been captured by a new guy, and all of a sudden Harry's treatment has swapped over from him to Peter. Now he's going crazy and is being consumed by darkness, and after jumping through 1,000 hoops, the suit comes off of Peter and goes back to Harry, and now Peter has to choose once more between the city and someone that he cares about. It's yet another impossible situation, and he's become exhausted. Miles is like having a hard time writing a college essay, and he has to decide to forgive or punish the man who killed his father. And he wants to ask this girl out. It's honestly pathetic, and I can't tell you how many times during my original playthrough that I would finish a mission as Peter and think, it's been a little while since I played as Miles, huh? Only for the game to either not let me switch to him, or for Miles to call Peter on the phone and say something to the effect of, hey, I'm in this game too. There's even a moment where Miles and Harry talk about feeling useless because neither of them have anything to do in the game. It's so aggravating because Miles is so fun to play as in this game, but it does everything in its power to deprive you of him. And then when he is actually doing something, he's, I don't know, making the ugliest costume known to man while the city is under invasion. Or he's trying to spit game while Peter's getting jumped by symbiotes. I know that it's hard to balance the two of them when there are decades worth of stories about Peter to pull from, and only like 13 or 14 years for Miles. But you know how you solve that? Create brand new stories for Miles. As neat as it is to have them in the game together and to be able to switch from one to the other, I don't want to sacrifice one Spider-Man for the other just to have that feature. I would truly, honestly, rather Miles continue to have his own spin-off games if it means that he doesn't feel like an afterthought in the game where he's on the cover. Miles' own game does such a good job of truly establishing him as the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. He's a hero of the people. The citizens of Harlem have seen his face, but they came together to protect him because he protects them. He gets free food, free haircuts, and whatever else just to show appreciation for what he does for them. He even still works a feast in his civilian life. Now, this is where Miles shines in the new game as well, when he's tracking down stolen instruments from the Jazz Museum and when we're observing the community and its history through his eyes. And I just want more of that. And that's the kind of hero and person that Miles is, and that's where he works best. Let Peter save the city, and let Miles protect the neighborhood. I know technically Miles isn't that powerful, but that's not interesting to me. I prefer Miles in these more personal and culturally connected stories. And that's what I think it should be. But and I'm willing to bet that there are people out there that agree, but I don't know, we'll just have to see what happens in Spider-Man 3. Anyway, this video went on way longer than I anticipated. Like I said, despite all of these asterisks, I do still strongly enjoy the game. I even love it. I still believe that it's a good game that I got hours and hours of enjoyment out of. I'm not out to change anyone's mind. I truly don't care to do anything like that. I just wanted to try to put all my thoughts in one place. After the data breach at Insomniac, where we actually got to see how much content got cut, I have to assume Sony forced this game out long before it was ready. Maybe it wasn't supposed to come out until late 2024, or maybe early 25. But, you know, without it, Sony wouldn't have really had a tentpole franchise release in 2023 other than Final Fantasy 16. But even then, Insomniac, it was 5 whole years. What were you doing? I know. The Miles game and Ratchet and Clank. I don't care. Santa Monica had an entire new game with multiple playable characters, several new enemy types, a whole new weapon, all sorts of new skills and abilities, a story that's twice as long, all in less time than you guys had. And then there's no DLC. Do you mean to tell me that Carnage is going to be tied up in the next game, which is supposed to be about the Green Goblin? I need to bump it up. It's not even out yet. Admittedly, I'm optimistic for the next game, and I'm certain that there will be one because this has sold over 10 million copies. And who knows what that one has waiting for us? Is it going to be Superior Spider-Man? God, I hope not. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys this time. I'll see you later. I'm gonna go play the first game again. Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.